Good morning, students. In today's class, we're going to talk about the Victorian Age. This class, for your understanding, is divided into two sections. In the first class, we will be discussing what the Victorian Age is, the historical introduction to the Victorian Age, and the three phases of the Victorian Age, which I have mentioned in my slide. Let us begin with the first definition of what is a Victorian Age. The Victorian Age is named after the reign of Queen Victoria. Several movements and reforms took place during this period, which influenced the literature. There was tremendous growth in publication of periodicals and also the emergence of children's literature as a genre. Dramatic monologue emerged as a poetic form in the poems of Robert Browning, Charles Dickens, George Eliot. The Bronte sisters were storytellers, and their novels reflected the Victorian period. Now let me tell you something about the historical introduction about the Victorian Age. The Victorian Age is named after the reign of Queen Victoria, who ruled from 1837 to 1901. She was the first English monarch to see her name given to the period of her reign while still living. Vast social, political, and technological changes occurred during this age. It was one of the most prosperous periods in the history of England, a period of industrial development and colonial expansion. It is also sometimes known as the Age of Reform because of the plethora of reforms which took place during this period. It was also an age of democracy. The major democratic movement in Britain during Queen Victorian reigns was directed towards expanding the voting population for parliamentary elections. Victoria came to the throne 5 years after the passage of the 1832 Reform Bill, which reduced property requirements for voting and holding office in Britain and increased the number of individuals entitled to vote. However, the 1832 Reform Act still failed to extend the vote beyond those owning property. As a result of this, the People's Charter was drawn up for the London Working Men's Association by Thomas Lovat and Francis Place in 1838, which demanded votes for all men, equal electoral districts, abolition of the requirement that members of parliament by property owners, payment for MPs, annual general election, and the secret ballot. This movement, known as the Chartist Movement of 1838, became important for working class agitators for social reform. The 1867 Reform Bill extended right to vote to all settled male tenants, and 1884 Reform Bill, which gave working men in rural England the same rights as those in the boroughs, achieved further democratization of British policy, and by the end of the 19th century, universal male suffrage became almost a reality. However, women were still deprived of the right to vote. On the social front, the Factory Act of 1833 was a major accomplishment for the property rights of child workers. Under this act, a maximum working week of 48 hours was set for children aged between 9 to 13, limited to 8 hours a day, and for children between 13 and 18, it was limited to 12 hours daily. The act also required children under 13 to receive elementary schooling for 2 hours each day. The 1842 Mines and Collieries Act banned all women and children under 10 from working underground. Further acts were introduced following this in 1847, 1853, 1867, 1874, 1878 and 1891, which took more steps to elevate the conditions of the working class. Apart from social and political reforms, reforms also took place on the economic front. The most important of these was the repeal of the Corn Law in 1846. The Corn Laws were a series of statutes enacted between 1815 and 1846, which kept corn prices at a high level to protect British farming from foreign competition. These laws were repealed by Prime Minister Robert Peel in 1846. In the end, we can say that the Victorian Age was also characterized by the triumph of the middle classes, with their belief in progress, their opposition to governmental interference in trade and economics, their moral purity, their religious faith, and the observance of external superficial norms for behavior. So, we have discussed what the Victorian Age is and the historical introduction to the Victorian Age. As I have mentioned, let me tell you about the three phases of the Victorian Age. The three phases of the Victorian Age namely comprise of the first phase, that is from 1837 to 1848. To just say in few words, it was an age of turbulence, economic and social difficulties. The second phase begins from 1848 and finishes in 1870, which was marked by economic prosperity and colonial expansion. And the last phase, that is from 1870 to 1901, is a period of skepticism. Let us take this into detail. The Victorian period is often divided into three phases. Early, as I mentioned, 1837 to 1848, mid 1848 to 1870, and the late 1870 to 1901. The early Victorian period was a period of turbulence marked by economic, political, social difficulties. Important events during this phase were the Chartist movement and the repeal of the Corn Laws. This period also saw large-scale expansion of railways. Literature of this period focused on the concerns of the new emerging middle and working class. J.S. Mill and Thomas Carroll are writers that belong to this particular phase. The second phase, that is from 1848 to 1870, was a period of economic prosperity and colonial expansion. Contrary to the first phase, this was a much stable stage. This phase witnessed the Great Exhibition of 1851, the first international exhibition of manufactured products. It was organized by Henry Cole and Prince Albert and held in a purpose-built Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, London. This phase of Victorian age saw the appearance of scientific works such as Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species in 1859 and The Descent of Man 1871, which challenged long-held religious assumptions. Works of Charles Dickens and George Eliot belong to this particular phase. The third phase, which begins from 1870 and finishes in 1901, was a period of skepticism when people began to question Britain's empire-building activities. An important topic of debate during this phase was the proposed Home Rule for Ireland. Literature of this period was marked by the decadent movement, who aspired to set literature and art free from the materialistic preoccupations of industrialized society. Writers associated with this movement were Oscar Wilde, Arthur Symons, and Ernest Dowson. These writers took a cue from French writers such as Bulwer and Godefroy and showed interest in perversity, ennui, art for art's sake, transgressive modes of sexuality, artificiality, and decay. So students, in today's class, we have taken up three important issues: what the Victorian age was, the historical background to the Victorian age, and the three phases of the Victorian age. In tomorrow's class, we are going to discuss how we can feel the conflict between science and religion in the Victorian age. We are going to discuss about the literary characteristics of the Victorian age, the literary movements of the Victorian age, and we are going to discuss in detail the major poets of the Victorian age. So much for the class today. Thank you, students.